Sebastian went missing overnight, February 25th into the 26th, and right now it is believed that the last time he was seen was being put to bed, according to his mother, on the 25th. The next morning, when she went to wake him up for school, he just wasn't there. So obviously Dog has 24 people in Tennessee right now as we speak, and they're not out in like fields, right, searching for anything, because we are going under the assumption that Sebastian is alive. That's the assumption, that's the overwhelming consensus within the groups investigating, whether it be officials or private investigators or contractors or assets or anybody else that's coming down, right? So in the coming weeks, as information starts to come in and as Dog's team gets a better understanding of who's doing what network initiated what. And when I say networks, typically in manhunt, you guys know, like, it's a criminal network and stuff like that, but in this case, it's a different kind of network. It's a network, the social network. There are a lot of impediments that happened early on in the case, and it's not so much what it has to deal with is people providing false information to YouTube creators, and the YouTube creators obviously are listening because those people have good information, right? So that's Saturday. No response. We had reached out, nothing. So Sunday, Dog says, let's try again. So we call the family, Mr. Proudfoot, and I ask about this investigator, right? And his response is that he doesn't. So Mr. Proudfoot tells the team that he has no idea who this individual is and how we put him in a group chat with this number and he has no idea what we're talking about and he doesn't know the guy, right? So let me back it up. A day or two before that, we had gotten a message from somebody that took a screenshot that said it was from the Proudfoot, Mr. Proudfoot, claiming that he did not hire Steve Fisher. It was a very nice message, that just denying that he had hired him, right? Which is why Dog had asked us to reach out. So Sunday comes around, Sunday being this Sunday, and again we had reached out to Mr. Proudfoot, this time being by phone. Dog had asked that we call from the tip line, so we call him from the tip line and ask about this investigator. Again, we are told very respectfully that he did not hire an investigator and he has no idea what we're talking about. So we took his word for it, obviously, and we thought that was that. So now it is Tuesday, and it turns out that either Mr. Proudfoot is lying to us or the investigator is lying to us, right? Because there's no in between. The investigator tweeted out that they would only contract a licensed person, yada yada. Sir, just so you know, we have licensed investigators in Tennessee that are contracted out by the company. So we took it as, originally, we thought maybe somebody had sent us that screenshot to try and get us to put it out there and say, oh, this guy was not hired, so they can debunk it. And then team up and say, see, they don't know what they're talking about. That's not the case, guys. We don't post stuff on X and Facebook and YouTube until the time is right, and the time is right now. And that's how we operate. Essentially, we ask a question, and if you answer, and you change your answer, and you make out that we are lying, kind of, so now you have one man who says he was retained. Why would he fly out there if he wasn't being paid? You have the other person who supposedly is paying him saying, I never heard of him. Today, we get called out again, which is funny. And the individual says, that shows how much you know, because I was with Mr. Proudfoot when you guys called yesterday. Interesting. So, this is where it gets interesting. If you guys watched the Nancy Grace piece, it was great. And they were on there, Chris, Katie, and they had said that they took a polygraph, and they also agreed, Chris did, to sit down with Nancy and take one. And he said basically something to the effect of, name the time and place and I'll be there, right guys? So it was on for it to happen. And at that time, there were rumors that he already had taken one from TBI. So those rumors are true. So Katie, Christopher, and Seth did take polygraphs with TBI. Now, the part that's not true is that Christopher Proudfoot told Nancy Grace that TBI told him he's not allowed to partake in a polygraph, right, with Nancy. That is not the case at all, actually. Not only is it common sense that the state, nobody can tell you what you can or can't do, especially when it comes to something like that, but just to get clarity, we ask, and what did they say? No, we would never give such an instruction, and that's silly. So again, it makes you really wonder where this whole circus is coming from, right? Now, when I say circus, I mean people come to town to try to help find Sebastian, and they are met by bullies. Every direction you look, you'll see the bullies, and they kind of try to gang up. But again, it's the little lies along the way that end up putting the pieces together rapidly. We are told that the investigator is not official from the family. We are told that the investigator is official from the investigator. And then we are told by the investigator that not only is he official, but he was at the home when Dog was trying to call him yesterday, which is interesting. That it means Mr. Proudfoot is either lying about the investigator or the investigator is lying about Mr. Proudfoot.
And in part of my research, I came across somebody in our group, and I wanted to read this stuff to you because this is about the unscrupulous PI. And, you know, everybody keeps thinking he's this great guy, and he's not. He's not. He is part of this corrupt organization. And every time we turn around, we learn something new about how dirty and nasty this guy is. And this is no different. This is the PI versus Justin Pincus. And this particular case is another case where he slandered, defamed, bullied, stalked, and all of these other things for, and then tried to sue the guy to absolve himself of any wrongdoing, even though it was just a way to try to get away from doing dirty stuff. So I wanted you guys to hear this. This was actually posted on October 28th, and it's on Justice for Sebastian. And it says a few excerpts from another legal case this investigator is involved in, and all of this public record. This guy really has been like this: defamation, doxing, blackmailing, death threats, relentless harassment, accusing people of DV, domestic violence, and being unemployed or mentally ill, threatens to have people arrested over nothing, terrorizes family of missing children, even accuses someone of falsely posing as law enforcement officer. He did the exact same thing this time around in this case, in the Sebastian Wayne Drake Rogers case. So now we're showing a massive history. Like, this guy is doing this. This is an unscrupulous PI. Is he licensed? Yes, he is. Is he legitimate? No, he's not. And I do believe 100% he lied on applications to get the licensing. And we will be getting to the bottom of it in due time. But what he's doing is unlawful. It goes against his PI license. And he's a disgusting individual. He's a disgusting individual that seems to always attack mostly women. So that should tell you how he feels about women. He's abusive, he's verbally abusive, and when he doesn't get his way, he tries to throw people in jail. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Doesn't it? He also has complaints against his license in Tennessee 2 years before becoming involved in Sebastian's case, but some reason it was ignored. One of those was mine, which was very well pled as well. This is insane. He has been involved behind the scenes since April, and he has a pattern. He's a common denominator, and he's absolutely the root of the chaos. So in this case, this is what it says. The defendant has not filed any false defamatory police report because he's the plaintiff. He tried to negate his responsibility and being in trouble because he's got, police reports filed against him. So he did this he thought he was smart by preemptively trying to sue this guy, right? And we all know who this man is, and we know that what he's saying, what the defendant is saying in this case is true about this unscrupulous, unethical, and unprofessional PI. And it says the defendant hasn't filed any false police report. Here's the highlighted part. The defendant has filed legal and legitimate police reports against the plaintiff for his continued stalking, harassment, threats, and doxing of his private information, including cell phone numbers, address, and real-time location. Sounds pretty familiar. Let's get over to the next highlighted area. It says the plaintiff continued to escalate his harassment, including threatening contact the defendant's clients and all. So he's not only doxing, but he's actually saying, I'm going to reach out to your clients and start telling him this. Does this sound pretty familiar, doesn't it? Sounds pretty familiar. Plaintiff continues to escalate. Remember, the plaintiff is this unscrupulous PI. The plaintiff continues to escalate his harassment, including threatening to contact defendant's clients and all, to cause him reputational and economic harm, and to contact his parents to get him forced evaluated, while alleging the defendant had mental illness on his Twitter, to his Twitter followers. Does this sound familiar? It seems like he's using the same playbook, the unscrupulous, illegal, unlawful playbook from case to case. Let's listen to the next highlighted part. This was just the plaintiff's latest effort to imprison defendant falsely. Sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? Here's another one. It says, this includes the plaintiff's problematic tendencies, such as being verbally abusive to dozens of vulnerable women, psychologically lying, and frequently contradicting claims, reported threats, and death wishes toward others, manipulative tactics and narratives, and fabricating professional licensure, to name a few. Wow. Wow. Let's read the next highlighted part. The defendant's knowledge at the time of filing this, only the state of Tennessee closed the defendant's complaint without investigating. I had an investigation on my complaint, while others are still under investigation. Let's go to the next highlighted part. The defendant agrees that the plaintiff was never fired from these missing person case because he was never hired for them. And he knows this, but this is another attempt to mislead the courts. Instead, the plaintiff inserts and embeds himself into families of missing persons, even admitted to stalking out the real life's physical location of one family, preys on another family's desperation, sells himself as a professionally licensed private investigator where he often isn't licensed, and obtains information under false pretenses. The plaintiff then engages in unprofessional, irresponsible, reckless, abusive, defamatory, and sometimes other unlawful conduct. Sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? Sounds like a pattern of behavior. The defendant will also highlight again that the plaintiff that provably made allegations about the defendant committing DV, domestic violence, and threatening to post the non-existence charge on Twitter. Sounds really familiar. Defendant claims that he was a licensed private investigator that donates significant numbers of hours to pro bono or volunteer work to locate missing persons, have multiple holes, and contradictions the published statements. He unlawfully promotes himself and performs private investigative services where he was not legally licensed. California was the most evidential. He abused and defamed multiple families of missing persons and their advocates. The defendant will be submitting statements from a few as previously stated. The plaintiff advises himself as a paid investigator online who charges $1,000 per hour, $1,500 per hour, and or $2,000 per hour, which are rates regularly rotated between every few days and weeks, which in and of itself raises a lot of red flags. The plaintiff only claims to be pro bono and volunteer when it comes to legal matters like this, or when trying to justify his unlicensed private investigation activities. Sounds pretty familiar. The defendant at no point attempted an unusual amount of interaction between himself and the plaintiff being the unscrupulous PI. Despite the plaintiff's outrageous claims, the defendant has struggled since March of 2022 to get plaintiff to leave him alone and stop his obsessive tweeting about him. Wow, sounds pretty familiar. The plaintiff knows that the defendant has been prominently and successfully involved in the missing person advocacy community from its initial start in the summer of 2021. Before the plaintiff launched his harassment and defamation campaign of the defendant, unprovoked, the defendant and the plaintiff had occasional and cordial communication, including the plaintiff asked the defendant for help with his alleged photography website. The defendant publicly stood up for the plaintiff when he was mocked over old photography work. The plaintiff congratulated the defendant for his success in locating a missing woman and reuniting her with her family. The defendant asked the plaintiff for help with missing case, and he publicly and privately agreed to. While the plaintiff claims the defendant began defamation against him with Coty, C-O-T-Y. This is another highlighted part. This is, again, sounds very familiar. The plaintiff, being the unscrupulous PI, did in fact author and had a third party send Coty Eady a letter blackmailing her to keep quiet. Otherwise, he would release communications that Coty Eady felt could destroy her marriage. Sound familiar? If you don't do what he says, he's going to destroy you. If you don't work with him, he's going to expose you. Sound familiar? The defendant had possession of this digital letter. The plaintiff has admitted publicly to sending this letter to third-party acquaintance, admitted to the defendant that she sent the letter on the plaintiff's behalf, expressing shame for doing so. The plaintiff seems to have lost track of his lies, as he had publicly admitted on Twitter to sending the letter to Coty Eady and also accidentally tweeting it to his own account himself before deleting it. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Sounds like a pattern of behavior. She even agrees at one point to file a police report against the plaintiff, which is the unscrupulous PI, noting to the defendant that she was scared of speaking out against him publicly. I am not. He's trash. He's unethical. If you have a story related to this unscrupulous PI, please come forward. Give me an email of your interaction with him and what happened, and we'll turn that over to the attorneys. Please come forward and give us that information if you have been a victim of this unscrupulous PI, and we have quite a bit on him. Publicly admitted on Twitter sending this letter to Coty Eady we read that. And then here's another one. It says, she even agreed at one point to file a police report against the plaintiff, noting that the defendant, that she was scared of speaking out publicly against him. The defendant has documentation for both his communications with Coty Eady and screenshots of similar conversations she's had with others. Seems awfully familiar. The plaintiff, i.e. the unscrupulous PI, continues to make public threats toward Coty Eady even after she deactivated from social media, terrified in fear from initial blackmail letter, which eventually influenced her to change her public story. Sad. I can tell you, there's nothing that man can do to make me shut up about his horrible business practices. It's unlawful, it's illegal, and he should be in jail. Never mind the fact that he impersonated a person and filed a federal document against me in a federal court, acting as another person and lying under oath saying he was a different person altogether when it was totally him doing it. He had control over the email. He's the one that filed the paperwork. He's the one that signed that attesting under oath that he is a woman and not a man. He is unscrupulous, unlawful, and should be held accountable for his actions. Just saying. The plaintiff continued to make public threats. Oh, the blackmail. The plaintiff has used her changed story to continuously defame the defendant. As many female victims of abuse men can attest to, And as Cody Eady confirms to the defendant and other privately, she's changed her story to try to make this all go away, fearing her safety from the plaintiff. Pretty scary stuff. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? The defendant was in his constitutional rights to file a police report, given that the plaintiff would not stop stalking, harassing, insulting, defaming, threatening, and doxing his private information online, all of which the plaintiff escalated over time. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? The defendant has never posed as law enforcement official despite the plaintiff's claim. The defendant believes that the plaintiff fabricated this allegation to distract from his own unlawful promotion of himself as a licensed private investigator where he was not licensed, and his unlawful offer to minors in an active investigation, which the court may find to be impersonation of a police officer. The defendant never claimed that the plaintiff plaintiff worked under him. The defendant did, however, invite the plaintiff into the case that he had expressed permission from the family and local police detectives to be involved in, and subsequently had commitment from the plaintiff to help him on after the defendant. I can't read the rest of that, but it cut off. But you guys see, it sounds very, very familiar to bully the defendant with his lawsuit by suggesting he couldn't find any friends of the defendant, that he needed mental health treatment. The plaintiff knows he could have reached out to any of the dozen of the defendant's friends from within the missing person community who the plaintiff being the unscrupulous PI, that has contact for. But he knows they all oppose him for the same reason the defendant does. His history of abusive, dishonest, and defamatory conduct toward the defendants themselves, families of missing persons, and others. Wow.